welcome back, everybody. I asked Brandon Jacob to get back on the phone with me. This is Mike Layton from Stochastic. Say hello, Brandon.
Mike, how you doing today?
Real good. I think last week's podcast on that touched on Live Oak Bank and their SBA lending program, we had a lot of feedback from people that really, when we were talking, we just touched on the topic of sort of how to sell to junior or maybe one of your key employees of, who's been a general manager, or sales manager for years. And since we had a lot of feedback on that, I thought it'd be a good topic for everybody to kind of dig into what you see about how to use the SBA lending program, that Live Oak Bank has, to basically sell the business to probably the people you know best, right?
Absolutely. And that's a good thing. Yeah. That's a good thing, Mike, because it is certainly a hot topic right now.
Well, I think, let's dig into the details. What can Live Oak Bank and SBA solve on the financing challenges of smaller contractors? And where's that all fit in?
Okay. Well, Mike, there's so many good contractors scattered throughout the United States. I know that you work with many of them, and for many of these guys who are a few trucks or even millions of dollars in revenue, some of these owners are approaching retirement. And for many, and I certainly see this in my valuation work, for many of these business owners, their exit strategy is to sell to a family member or to sell to an employee. And this is a good exit strategy for these businesses, with the exception of traditionally there's been one big hurdle.
So tell me about the hurdle. I mean, what's the big thing that keeps people from stepping over the line, right, and actually doing something today?
The big hurdle, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Today, yeah, what makes them not do that today?
Okay, today what traditionally happens is that junior, son or daughter, and even employee, more so employee, they are typically not going to have any kind of real money to put down on that business. And naturally, right, a seller, if I'm nearing retirement and I'm going to hand my business over to my son or daughter or to a third-party employee, I'm really hoping to get cash at close. And it makes sense, right? Traditionally, if I'm working in an air conditioning business as a general manager, I might be making a great living, but I'm paying bills. I'm putting aside some money, but I'm not putting enough money down. I'm not putting enough money aside to make it a big enough reason for somebody to sell me the business because I don't have enough money at close.
And so the solution up to now is really for the seller to carry a note, right, and just wait for his money.
That has been the traditional way to do this. And again, that's fine. But what happens when the buyer has no money at close? So it's not the most perfect situation to take on a seller note.
So a solution that's kind of new is for the buyer to secure a loan from somebody like Live Oak Bank, pay the seller at close, and then the buyer pays back Live Oak Bank through an SBA loan through the cash flow of the business that he now owns?
Exactly. And through this process, now the seller is liquidated at close. He has all his cash.
Well, it's funny is we were talking earlier, I got an email from a guy that I've worked with for, 10 years, and he was asking me if I knew any angel investors because he was tired of working for somebody else and wanted to buy a business in the Sunshine State. And I think this kind of program, instead of finding somebody who says, "Oh, I'll give you $2 million, go ahead," is really realistic for a smaller contractor, don't you think?
Absolutely, and like we discussed earlier, I mean, that's probably not going to happen where somebody who has all this money and has nothing else to do but lend it to a stranger, an angel investor.
Right.
That's not likely to happen, but Live Oak Bank and the SBA program is absolutely something that is for real, and these guys are very excited about our industry.
Well, let's kind of go through some of the specifics, because I do know that based on some of the feedback we got from the last podcast, and anybody that's probably listening to this, whether you are, quote, junior or the owner, the buyer and the seller on a smaller business, I mean, they know each other intimately, right? And
Right.
So they know your work ethic, they know the challenges that you have in your family, they know your shortcomings, they know each other as intimately almost as a married couple. You spend more time together, right? So the last
Right.
time we talked, you mentioned 90% that the SBA loan can loan to a buyer. Why don't we just kind of walk through kind of the specifics of use 90% as a number, because people can subtract that from 100% pretty easily.
Right. Okay. Well, as we did discuss, I mean, the SBA and Live Oak Bank, they are willing to lend as much as 90%, which is pretty phenomenal because the reciprocal is 10%. So son or daughter or general manager, I have to come up with 10% of that purchase price at close. So in a hypothetical example, let's assume the business is worth $1 million, right? We sit down and do a valuation. This business could support $1 million in valuation. The buyer might only have to come up with $100,000. Live Oak's going to provide the financing for the rest. So it's extremely, it's definitely going to help that buyer who does not have a ton of cash.
So, okay, 90%. Can it ever be more, or can the buyer kind of do a refinance his house to come up with $100,000, or I mean, what are some of the options?
There's another option, and Mike, it goes like this: if the seller is willing to take 5% of the purchase price in a seller note, and remember we talked about seller notes earlier, where traditionally the seller might have to take 80% in the seller note. In this case, if the seller says, I'm willing to carry 5% as a seller note, which in the $1 million example would be $50,000, Live Oak would lend the same $900,000, and now the buyer only has to come out of pocket $50,000. So in this case, buyer could own this business with as little as $50,000 cash of his own money put down.
And then for those who are listening, they can obviously do the math. Those are the numbers for $1 million business. $2 million's double that. $3 million's triple that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I mean, are there any stipulations to the seller note? I mean, for instance, So let's say you got a GM. Let's take a typical business, like a $3 million business, right? There's no family in the business. Okay, stay with me. There's no family in the business, but the owner knows I've got a great general manager and a great sales manager, and they've been wanting. They get along well together. They're complementary guys, complementary skill sets, the right age. They could come together and come up with, between the two of them, for a $3 million business, $150,000, and that's all they'd have to come to the bank with.
That is correct. If the seller, but the stipulation on the seller note,
Yeah, right.
it's kind of important to point out, and it's not a major stipulation, but in the case of the seller note qualifying, the seller note, he would have to wait. He would be subordinate to the Live Oak note, meaning he could not be paid on that $50,000 in my earlier example until Live Oak Bank had their note paid off. So there's a little bit, he's got to wait a little bit for that small, tiny $50,000 piece, but he's still getting paid everything else at close.
Which can be a pretty low risk, right? Particularly if a guy wants to get out right away, right?
Right.
Okay, so a daughter or a manager could put down as little as, say, $50,000 of his own money and buy a contracting business that's a typical profile HVAC for $1 million, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, okay, what if they've been kind of thinking about this for a while, and the seller is sort of to keep people happy, giving them some monopoly money equity?
Let's talk about that, because it gets even better, right? I mean, we talk about exit strategy and exit planning. If at some point in time the business owner says, I'm going to eventually sell to my son, my daughter, my general manager, and he transfers 10% of the business to that future buyer, then at the time of close, Live Oak's going to step in and they'll do the remaining 90%. So in this situation, Mike, the buyer would literally have to have no money at close. Again, that's if he's coming into the transaction with already owning 10% of the business. Now, just like everything else, there's a small stipulation. We can't do that 3 days before the close. Hey, I'm going to sell you 10%, and now Live Oak's going to step in for the 90, and we're going to all do this in 1 week. The SBA rules is that 10% must be owned by the buyer for a period of 2 years. So again, there's a little bit of planning that goes into this.
So I mean, that's I get off topic sometimes when you and I talk, but so if a guy's thinking that way, let's say he's hearing this now, and he's saying, I need to get things in place, right? Because the SBA is going to want to say, okay, have you been owning the business for several years, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have an owner looking ahead, even though he's maybe dealing with family. He needs to get to spend the money with the right accountant,
mm-hmm.
the right lawyer, and perhaps somebody like yourself on evaluation, right? Because they got an offer and a consideration and acceptance. But he needs really a paper trail and the right legal documents to show somebody like Live Oak, okay, this is what I did. Here's what I gave him the percentage. We did this in 2016. Here's the tax returns. Here's the K-1s, right? He needs to have all those boxes checked. If he wants to do this 2 years from now, he might as well do it now. Start now.
Right. And think about this, right? Now I have a general manager that I want to sell to. Let's use the general manager in this example. And selling that percentage and selling 10% to that general manager today gives that general manager the buy-in, right? I mean, now this is for real. This is going to really happen. And maybe sitting down with that general manager and saying, I'm going to sell you this 10% now, and the remainder is going to come 2 years or maybe a little bit more down the line, but this is what we're doing. Now, Mike, I have a general manager who is committed to this transaction.
I mean, that's probably the most likely scenario in so many of these businesses, right? I have a critical employee, and they kind of go back and forth with the fantasy world. I'm a part owner, but they don't lay out the rest of it, right? Okay, here's what's going to happen. You're a part owner today, and in 36 months, this is going to happen, and then we're going to go to the next stage, and then the business grows and your value grows and the asset increases, and that way you'll be able to afford it no matter how big the business gets today, because that solves part of the problem. A lot of guys say, I don't want to grow the business and then buy it from you, right?
Okay, absolutely.
So
I see that all the time.
Yeah, if I get this 10% now, I'm really not giving you any cash, really, right? And so if the valuation grows, then the bank will just loan me that much more money because that piece of paper gives me the equity I need to buy you out, even if the business doubles, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, certainly there's other ways to manage that final valuation piece. They could agree on a valuation up front, or they could value it at the time when the remaining 90% is going to be purchased. But the important thing, and I want to make this, very clear, is that going through a loan like this from the SBA, from Live Oak Bank, it's going to provide some assurance to the buyer that he's not walking into a situation where he's significantly overpaying for the business because of the checks and balances that the bank has. They're not going to say, here's a bunch of money, Mr. Buyer, and not make damn sure that the cash flow from the business he's acquiring it's going to have to be proven that it could pay back that note through the cash flows of the business, right? So bottom line, say in a shorter way, it can't be overvalued. It can't. There's no way they're going to approve a loan where the business is overvalued.
Yeah, sometimes people forget a bank technically is called a financial intermediary, right? That's what they are. They're supposed to move capital from people that have it to people that, in theory, can do more with it than the people that already have it. So being that intermediary is kind of that impartial. The bank just wants to maximize their returns, right?
Right.
And so they don't want to loan more money than they think they can get back. Pretty simple. And this solves that problem for a lot of guys, right? Because otherwise, someone like yourself can come in and give them a valuation, and then 3 years later when they do it, you have the next valuation, but you're using the same methodology both times, right? And then the bank says, yep, these numbers check out, and let's, kind of move from there. There's just so many options here. That's why I thought it'd be good to even just kind of have a short follow-up. There's so many different options here, but they all seem to enable or help a seller receive cash at the close for his business, and even from a buyer that doesn't have a ton of cash to buy that business, right?
Absolutely.
So what are the let's circle around and just kind of walk through the cash flow not collateral kind of methodology, those I know you're a CPA, so you think of everything in numbers and rules. What are some of the things you talked about, like the 90% rule and all the rest of that?
Okay, well, let me walk through a couple kind of just brief highlights or data points that's important for people to understand is, traditionally, why can't I go to my local bank, right? Because the first thing my local bank is going to say is, okay, well, we're going to lend on collateral, meaning if there's a default, we want to have the ability to come and get stuff. And, as we talked in the past, our businesses, there's a fleet, and some of these fleets could have a lot of value, but beyond the fleet, there's not a whole lot of assets for a bank to say, yes, this is what we could use for collateral. And again, that is why the SBA program is so relevant to our industry, because they'll look at a loan through cash flow. And what that means is you're going to take out a loan, and the cash flow through the acquired business is going to have to be able to pay back that loan, which, by the way, in a business acquisition, it's going to be 10 years. So, yes, as the buyer, I'm going to have to pay on a monthly basis Live Oak Bank back for from the money I borrowed to buy the business, but I have 10 years to do this, right? And that's a lot of time, right? It's set up for success.
Well, I know the first time, I've started some businesses that weren't very capital intensive when I was real young. And then 15, 16 years ago, I had a chance to buy one, but it had a lot of assets, right? So at the time, I just was floored by how much money the bank would loan me and my partners, of course, as long as we pledged everything we owned. But when I kind of asked them that, they said, well, the business you're buying includes 60 acres and a warehouse and an office complex, So worst case, we get your house and the 60 acres and the warehouse and the office building. And then we, through cash flow, paid that off in 24 months and then built more buildings. And once you had that relationship established with the bank, it was really all just off of cash flow. And I think if you haven't done it before and sat down with bankers, it's not as complicated as you might think it is. And it sounds like where SBA loans with Live Oak are so different is it's not a one-off event for them. They know what the numbers ought to be and how to work, right?
Yeah, no doubt, and that's actually a great point because they got to start in 2008 lending to veterinarians. Think about what veterinarians have for assets. I mean, even less than our fleet, a service contractor's fleet. So, again, they are very comfortable with that concept of lending through cash flow. And they're very comfortable, Mike, with saying, hey, this is an industry we believe in, right? So it's not, hey, this week we're going to go out and try to find an SBA, try to lend to a veterinarian, and then the next week we're going to go out and lend to a craft brewery, and then next week some agricultural process. We're going to set up verticals where we're going to put people in place at the bank who are going to understand our industry. And as time goes by and as they start producing loans, they're going to be able to say, and they're going to rely on people like myself, consultants in the industry, to get up to speed. And they're going to say, okay, this makes sense. This absolutely makes sense. We could lend on this, and it's not going to take 4, 5, 6 months for them to make that decision on whether or not the loan is worthy or not. It's going to be rapid fire. And to your point about if I'm a general manager, son or daughter, I might not have ever talked to a banker before. I mean, I literally may have never sat down and talked to a commercial lender in my life. Live Oak Bank does this all day long. They provide loans to people like this. They understand where the borrower is coming from.
And I think, as we get close to wrapping this up, because I know this is something that sometimes, think about the people that the buyer and the seller are doing business with who know each other very well. Having this conversation with yourself, right, and someone from the bank is the kind of thing. It's kind of like planning your own will, right? Or in theory, you're going to go in a nursing home maybe someday. So if you need to sit down and talk to somebody about it before you want it to happen, and this is kind of similar, right? You're not going to work forever. Your GM or your GM might be a relative. Who knows? They're not going to sit around and want to wait for 20 years for you to decide to be, okay, I'll sell it. If you have that conversation now and plan for it, this is the kind of thing that you can basically, you can get all your money if you're the owner 24, 36 months from now, right? If you plan now.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. And, and to that point, I've certainly have done father-son valuations historically where son pulls me aside in confidence and say, I can do other things if Dad doesn't
Right.
formulate
Oh,
the
yeah.
plan. And what it does is, hey, Junior, let's sit down and talk to Live Oak Bank. Don't have to commit today to anything. Let's see if this is something that we could rely upon when that time comes. And you know, it's interesting because this is the second podcast that you and I did on this subject, and I have already had people follow up and say, I'm not ready. And my point to them is, have a conversation with them. You know, because when you are ready, you're going to be that much further ahead.
It's funny that you mentioned that. I got a customer, and I know you've never met him, but he's in his 70s, right? And he started to have that conversation with his son. I'm talking 15 years ago, right? And they didn't get it resolved, right? And it was kind of, okay, what are we going to do, Pop? What are we going to do, Pop? The son left.
Yeah.
Went work corporate for a while, right? Dad's getting older, going, oh, hell, what have I done? Son's like going, hey, man, I got this corporate gig. I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm still in the industry, but not working for you. And it was just about a year ago where he got his son, you know, who's now in his mid-50s, to leave the corporate world and come back in to the business. But Dad is to this day, he's holding the note. He's 70-something years old, and maybe the son will make a go of it. Maybe he won't. I guess it seems to be going okay. But his example of going through spending years trying to figure out who am I going to sell this to, and we got online and I showed him the value, the business ought to be able to generate, and so forth. He could have knocked off all that pain and aggravation and had his money in his hand today if he had just had a similar conversation like we're talking about with his son 3 years ago.
And Mike, in the example you just gave, it relatively worked out pretty well. You know, there's certainly other examples where it doesn't work. A son says, I'm in corporate, I've left and I'm not coming back, right?
Yeah.
Or, you know, again, your example of Dad's 70 and there's a 10-year note that every month son pays Dad, and, you know, that's just not, it's not the best way to do things. Dad should be liquidated, and then, by the way, it's an important point to point out as well is under the SBA rules, seller has to be out of the business after 1 year, and you know, I think that in itself is a good thing because it also helps Dad to come to grips with I'm selling the business and giving it over to my son and retiring. And that's an important point to point out, though, because that is a rule. I mean, they designed the program for the new owner to be the real owner.
Yeah, I got another guy. I mean, you start thinking about it, I got two sons and a dad, and the sons bought Dad out years ago, right? And they've made a great success out of it, and it's all good, right? It's all good. But Dad hasn't let go completely, and the sons occasionally go, oh, you know, kind of laugh and go, okay, well, tell you what, you go have a meeting with Dad. I'm busy. But we bought Dad out 5 years ago. He got all his money. He finished getting all his money, and you know, it's more of a courtesy thing. But having a third party goes, no, man, you have to be out. What do you mean you have to be out? You're not looking at mail plans or marketing plans, or you're not using their email. You're out. Go retire. Go fishing or bowling, whatever you want to do. I don't care. Go play with the grandkids, but leave your son alone. He owns a business. You got the money. What's the problem? Because you don't have to you can't walk in and say, well, I haven't got all my money yet, so I got to keep my thumb in my thumb in the pie. No, you have all your money. It's our problem, right? Yeah.
That, you know, and that's it exactly right. And that's probably what drives some people to never really want to let go. My God, I got a 10-year note and I got 6 years left to be paid on it, and I damn sure hope that Junior is able to manage his business, because if not, then I have no money. I have no money coming in. That's a great point. Under this example, hey, best of luck to you, son. I could work a year and do the transition. Then I'm going to step out. I'm going to remain your cheerleader and cheer you on from the sidelines. But I've got my money. and it's now yours, Junior.
Well, I think this should answer a lot of people's questions who really said, okay, tell me a little more about that, dig into some of the details. Obviously, anybody listening to this has all the contact information. You couldn't have clicked and downloaded without getting that, but thanks. It's always fun to talk to you, and then if we don't get distracted thinking about customers or living through some of the things that we talk about. But anything else you want to add, Brandon, before we kind of wrap it up?
No, that's just it. Again, I just always like to, on the first podcast, I closed with mentioning that, Mike, this is truly, this is a monstrous opportunity for service contractors. And, because you and I kind of get off on, we always use the word air conditioning when we talk about contractors, right? I don't know why.
Yeah, I do that. I do the same thing. Yeah. Yeah.
And I work with plumbers all the time, but my God, I always go back to talking about air conditioning contractors. This is service contracting vertical. Okay. Hey, Brandon, what about if I have a pest control business? What about if I have a combination air conditioning, plumbing, and foundation repair or something? They're open to that. So it's not, very important point to point out. It's not just air conditioning. It is the service contracting vertical.
Yeah, good point. I got a bunch of guys that are, when you look at it, they do have, like you said, pest control. I got another guy that does foundation repair. You've got, in fact, I've got one guy
electrical,
that likes pest control, right? Electrical, yeah, absolutely. Sewer repair, and there's a whole bunch of it. But I think this applies to everybody. I hope this answers some of the questions of the people that kind of responded after pulling down the first session we did, and I guess I'll see you in Vegas early next month at the Service World Expo.
I look forward to seeing you, Mike.
All right. Thanks for making the time available, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.